So today we're going to talk about a very interesting, heavy topic. Somebody asked me to talk about unhealed trauma. So I got some information and I'm going to read some of it and discuss it. So if you're somebody who doesn't want to talk about that, skip to the next video. But if you're somebody who wants to hear more about unhealed trauma and what it looks like, please stick around because I'm going to do the introduction and then I'm going to tell you what I found. I am Queen Osset Haru, and thank you for joining me for another wonderful edition of Ask an Aquarius. If you haven't already, please hit the red subscribe button and smack the bell. Also, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and pass it on to somebody else who might like it as well. Don't forget to leave us a positive comment in the comment section and stick around to the end of the video because I do have some positive comments to respond to. Likewise, if you would like to get a reading done, please email me or check out my social media. You can leave me a message there too. If you would like to become one of my patrons on Patreon, now is a great time because I dropped 2 videos that I didn't drop here. And every week I've been dropping videos just for my patrons. So if you want to see the magical minutes or the early releases of Ask an Aquarius, you want to become a patron. Also, if you want to get some Ask an Aquarius merchandise, those links are underneath this video. If you would like to give me a gift from my Amazon wish list, that is underneath this video. And if you would like to give a donation to the channel, my PayPal is underneath this video. So let's get started, okay? Unhealed trauma, what can it look like? So sometimes I meet people and I can immediately tell they have unhealed trauma. And some of the reasons how I can tell, or how a psychiatrist or a therapist or a mental health person can tell, is by their behavior. So in here, I have some of the behaviors. There's many, many more, but these are some of the ones that were repetitive. So this is what unhealed trauma can look like in yourself, or if you witness it in another person. The first one is low sense of self-worth. A person who has unhealed trauma will often not think highly of themselves. They might have been told, maybe their trauma was somebody verbally abusing them and attacking their self-worth. That happens a lot, unfortunately. So it really depends on the situation, but a lot of people who are in an unhealed state, because remember, you can heal trauma too. So people who are still in the unhealed part, sometimes you will see a lack of self-worth by how they treat themselves and by the things they say about themselves. And you can just see it and you can hear it. Unhealed trauma can also look like codependency in relationships. And this is very common. I see this with a lot of people, especially with clients that I have. But basically, codependency is when you are dependent on another person and that person is dependent on you. Now, in itself, if this is a healthy person and you're healthy, this might not be too bad. It probably would, it changes names when it has a healthy connotation. Like if I'm healthy and you're healthy and we are interdependent, we're living together, we're married, or whatever the case is, that can be healthy. But if you are with a unhealthy person, or if you're both unhealthy, that's when it becomes a codependency. I'll give you an example. Let's say your wife is a terrible alcoholic. She's always drinking, falling down, making mistakes, spending too much money. And you, as the wife or as the husband, you're covering up for them. You're cleaning up their messes. You're washing them up and getting them ready for work. You're calling them out sick, when they just can't make it. You're covering up for them. You're enabling them to keep on messing up, basically. So in most of these cases, you think you're helping them, but you're really just enabling them to kill themselves. you are addicted to them. According to psychiatrists, the healthier person is addicted to the addicted person. So you both have an addiction. So this becomes, in a lot of cases, a codependency. They're dependent on you to help them keep it together, and you're dependent on them because that's your fix. And in a lot of situations, this is self-destructive and destructive to the other person. So this is a big one, and it always, not always, it most times does draw back to unhealed trauma. Fear of being abandoned. If you are somebody who has unhealed abandonments, then this would be a big one. A person who, let's say, for example, their mother left them, their father left them, they were put up for adoption, even if they were put up for an adoption and have a good family, sometimes they end up with a fear of abandonment. So basically, it just means that at some point you were abandoned and that trauma has never been healed. You haven't reconciled that trauma yet. So if a person threatens to leave you, especially a person who knows that, some of the times we deal with people who are very manipulative and they can tell you have an abandonment issue. And I remember one lady said to me that her boyfriend knew that she had a fear of abandonment. So whenever she made him angry, he wouldn't call her. Her anxiety would shoot through the roof. She would be upset. She wouldn't know what to do. And then a couple days later, he'd pop back up like nothing happened because he knew she had it and he was a wicked person and was playing on it. So that's another one that comes up a lot for a lot of people. Unhealed trauma can also look like putting your needs aside for other people. Some people who have unhealed trauma always had to do that. So they feel like they're going to put their needs aside to keep you happy, either to keep you around because they might also have a fear of abandonment. It could be out of the codependency, or it could be out of the self-worth, and it could be out of a number of other things too. But those are the main ones that come up right next to it. So they'll put their needs aside, and not sometimes, every time. It's one thing to put your needs ahead of somebody else's, or for instance, a mother. If your child needs something, you probably would take care of them before yourself. If I need a new pair of shoes and my daughter needs a new pair of shoes, I'm going to buy her shoes first because she's my daughter. Then I'm going to buy my shoes. If money is tight and that's an issue. So that is something that's normal. It's a priority. But if I put myself last for everybody all the time, that probably has something to do with unhealed trauma. I'm not seeing myself as worth it. So that goes right back to the sense of lack of self-worth. Unhealed trauma can look like craving for external validation. Somebody was saying the other day that their belongings gave them validation. And we were talking about this because they were talking about tarot. They had a huge tarot collection, and they were saying they felt like their collection gave them validation. And this is one of those times you're looking for something external to give you validation, but it can't. You can only get validation in here. So if you feel validated because you have fancy cars, for example, or because you have diamonds, for example, that is external, and it is fake. It's fake validation, because if you lose those things, you're still the same person. You're still that same person. But you can't tell that person that if they lost those things and they are into external validation, they're going to be devastated. It can also look like, an innate feeling of shame. Oh my God. If somebody has unhealed trauma, emotional trauma, physical trauma, sexual trauma, that can definitely come up as shame, especially the latter. So if a person is always, being shameful or giving off a shameful energy, or ashamed of themselves, it could be because they have some type of unhealed trauma. Now, Remember, I said all of these could be, and I'm saying that for a reason, because you have to really be diagnosed by a therapist to know what these are. I'm just giving you the common signs that other people observe or that you might observe. The next one says that sometimes it means not being able to tolerate conflict. A person who has unhealed trauma from, let's say, a violent home. Let's say they were in a violent relationship. Their mother was violent. Their father was violent. Their husband, their wife was violent. This kind of person may not be able to cope if things get crazy. If there's an emergency, for example, this kind of person would probably have a really hard time with a conflict. They might have a whole breakdown or need to escape and get away from the situation. If something happens like a fire or a medical emergency, this kind of person might not be able to even deal with that kind of a conflict with themselves or with another person, because they're so used to conflict that they just can't tolerate it. It probably gives them anxiety or panic or something like that. So they're not going to be able to be around it. And if they are around it, they're not going to be able to emotionally handle it. Unhealed trauma can also look like being overly agreeable. This is also kind of like the person who sets aside their needs. This person agrees all the time with everyone, even if it's conflicting things. Their mother can say the sky is blue, and they'll say, you're right. Their father can say the sky is yellow. They'll be like, you're right. Somebody else can come in the room and say, no, the sky is blue. You're right too. They never really have an opinion. They just tell everybody that they're right because they don't want to start no static. If you grew up in a house where your parent was explosive, for example, if your father used to get drunk and snap out, and you knew that being quiet and out of the way was the way, or if you knew that just make nice and daddy would go to bed, or mommy would go out, if you just make nice, then you might continue that behavior throughout your lifetime and might not even notice it. Unhealed trauma can also look like difficulty standing up for yourself and asserting your boundaries, because your unhealed trauma probably pushed past your boundaries, because unhealed trauma generally a lot of times comes from some type of traumatic situation or some type of prolonged, possibly, or one-time abuse. So your boundary has been violated emotionally, mentally, physically, some other kind of way, So if your boundary has been violated, it's going to be hard for some of those people to stand up for themselves and to set boundaries. Now, some people might be the exact opposite, as we're getting ready to see later. I think they might actually talk about it, or they might not. I don't think that's on here. But some people could be the exact opposite, where they are they're overly sensitive about their boundaries. So you might get one or the other. Somebody that can't set them, can't hold them. They're a doormat. They let everybody run all over them and they hate it, but they can't do anything about it. Or you have the person that is really stern, really, they're real sensitive about everything. If you even say you don't like, their hair or something like that, they fly off the handle. This is the kind of person who cannot set a boundary. Well, I shouldn't say they cannot set them. They have them everywhere. Everywhere is a boundary. It's like a landmine, You walk into a place, it's bombs everywhere, Some of these people, we call them triggered. But these people will be easily triggered and frequently triggered. So after a while, these kind of people, a lot of people kind of shy away from, because they don't want to trigger you. So they stop messing with you. So this is another common one as well. It can also look like tolerating abusive behaviors from others. So if your unhealed trauma is tied to abuse, and you might find yourself in other abusive relationships. I see this a lot. I see a lot of people, adults, who were abused children, and now they're being abused by their spouse. They're being abused by their children. They're being abused by their boss. And it's like, wait a minute, you came out of abuse and went right back into abuse. And this person might be in multiple abusive relationships over and over again until they heal the trauma. It can also look like resisting positive change. This one is a real difficult one for me because I had an ex I went through this with, and I could not understand what was wrong with her. And now, years later, I'm like, oh, it was unhealed trauma. I knew she had unhealed trauma. I just didn't know it showed up as resisting positive change because I knew she had unhealed trauma and I kept trying to help her heal and she kept resisting it. She kept resisting going to therapy. She kept resisting reading the self-help books. She kept resisting the conversations, you know? She kept resisting making the positive changes because I don't know about her case why the because is, but according to psychologists, there's a couple different reasons. One of them is that they don't really trust change. A lot of people who have unhealed trauma like things to stay the same. So positive change is still change, and that made them uncomfortable. Likewise, a lot of times they don't believe that the positive change will last. Eventually, the other shoe is going to fall. So they don't want to get their hopes up and start to believe in positive change, and then their whole life fall apart all over again. So these are two of the reasons I found, but there are other ones. And this is very true. And I could not understand it because when I was seeing this woman, I loved this woman to death. And one of the things that I noticed was that every time, because I would leave her life and come back, because she would do stupid stuff and I would leave. And I noticed that every time I came back, there was a fire. You know, something was wrong. She had gotten evicted, or she was in a fight with her neighbor, or her kid's father was taking her to court, or it was always a fire. And it used to be 2 or 3 fires at once. And every time I would show up with all these solutions, because that's what Aquarius does. We come with solutions. And I help her put out her fires. And then she would be unhappy, listless, attitudey, start doing stupid stuff to piss me off. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, when everything was crazy and negative and all over the place and she was anxious and worried, she was fine. But when things got quiet and calm and everything was okay, that's when she started acting a fool. And I realized later, that's unhealed trauma. And the last one is, unhealed trauma can also look like always fearing what might happen next. A person who has been in multiple traumatic situations, or even just one traumatic situation, may always be thinking the other shoe is going to fall. They may be always thinking they're one step away from something awful happening. In most of these cases, nothing really happens, but they're so paranoid that something is going to happen because remember I said their boundary at some point in time was violated and they didn't know. You don't know. Somebody doesn't call you and say, okay, I'm gonna come violate your boundaries. I hope you're ready. It just happens out of the clear blue sky in most cases. So this kind of person is always fearing, is there another abuser? Is there another predator? Is there another attacker? Is there another bad situation? Is there another fire? Is there another war? Is there another trauma around the corner? And unfortunately for these kinds of people, until they heal the trauma, this can be like living in hell. Can you imagine, those of you who don't have unhealed trauma, can you imagine constantly being afraid that something is going to happen? And these kinds of people have high anxiety. They usually have depression. Many of them get medicated for it, and some of them don't. Some of them need to. It just depends on the situation. So in my personal opinion, I think that I see this with a lot of different people. And I think the thing to do is to go to the source. If all of this is happening because of unhealed trauma, I say do your best to heal the trauma as much as you can. Some people can heal their traumas. Some people can get them mostly healed or halfway healed. Half or mostly is better than none. So I would say, if you recognize these in yourself, that the smartest thing to do would be to heal the traumas. See a therapist. I always recommend a professional, a therapist, a spiritual counselor, something, a priestess, who else? Let me see, a psychiatrist, somebody, see somebody and work self-help books. That's a great one for people that don't trust nobody. Get yourself some self-help books and heal those traumas. Okay? All right, that's what unhealed trauma can look like. So now we're going to take a look at our positive comments. Lily gave us our first positive comment, okay? Now this comment says, too hard to handle or too cold to hold. Who remembers the artist? So if any of you remember the artist, please write it in the comment section. I'll say it again. Too hard to handle or too cold to hold. I don't remember it. I think it's a rap song, and I know it's a man because I can hear his voice, but I don't remember. So I didn't want to cheat and Google it. So you guys tell me who remembers that one. Luz Lopez. Hey, Luz. Luz said, hi, Queen. Happy Tubular Tuesday. She sent this on Tuesday. So now it's Monday. So I'm going to say happy Monday. Happy making it happen Monday, okay? All right. All right, that was our last positive comment. So come back soon because I got a lot more to say. See you later.